it's really interesting. I think when you look at the Act, Peter was fortunate to have a statutory status. And if you look at the Act, it says you've got to have regard not just to facilitating economic growth, you've got to have regard to the environment, you've got to have regard to social. And I think, if you think about, Richard, what is it you want out of life? You want a house that you can live in, it's got a roof over it, you want access to workspace, to place somewhere you can work, you want to be able to get there, you want access to education, access to healthcare, you want to go to the pub, you might want to go to the village hall. And so that sort of social infrastructure is really important in terms of communities' sort of health and well-being. And then, if you're a business that's thinking of locating to a particular area, you want your people to get out into green spaces at weekend. You want something to do. So, economic growth is only going to be successful if you genuinely address some of the social and environmental challenges that we face. And that's where land use planning is so crucial. We talk a lot about spatial planning. We don't do it particularly well. Just that letter that the Secretary of State sent about EV charging not only went to all the local transport authorities, it went to every single borough and district. Now, if that is not a disjointed approach to some of the challenges we face, I don't know what is. And I think STBs can start to work in that land use, genuinely putting back the spatial planning. That means, Richard, where you live, you've got access to all those things that lead to economic prosperity and environmental and social well-being.
Now, Steve, I know you've talked about spatial planning and all the rest of it, but Peter mentioned there also how we use the network, what times you travel and that sort of thing. I was living in London during the Olympics, and there were more people using the tube, but it was glorious because there was never anyone on it because it was just spread across the day. I was talking to someone the other day who was building a big office complex in central London as well, and they were saying they're expecting 50% occupancy, so half the staff wouldn't be there half the time. How big do you think we get that yet? That in the future, people are going to, if you move around in a different way, actually you won't get these big kind of clogs on the roads in the morning and the evening. We're not using what we've got very well at the moment.
I think we're starting to see a change in employment and associated behaviour, which I'm harking back now to the past planning policies that I was involved in back in the late 1980s, early 90s. That's when we started talking about the thing that we now call mobility as a service. That's when we talked about the need to travel and reducing the need to travel. But what the Olympics showed us is two things, I would say. One is it is possible to keep the city functioning, but to dampen the demand for the transport network. But it takes effort. It took a huge amount of effort for those 2 to 3 weeks to make sure that, for example, the managers of office buildings persuaded staff not to have their online deliveries delivered to the workplace. We found in the Department for Transport we were keeping a post room open, and the post room was predominantly dealing with the Amazon deliveries for our staff, which could happily have been left in a hedge in their front garden like they're supposed to be. So I do notice, as a rail commuter myself, I've been a rail commuter all my adult life, but I notice increasingly it's getting easier to get a seat. It was very, very hard, and mostly when the trains are running at a time, it's getting easier to get a seat. People tell me Friday is the new Saturday. Well, actually, Monday of this week was the new Friday. There's plenty of room. So I think we are starting to see it change, but we shouldn't forget not everyone has the luxury of being an office worker with flexible time and the potential to sit with a laptop, as some of us do, and work wherever is convenient for us. If you're running a retail outlet, or if you're working on a factory production line, you need to be there at the right time, on time, and we need to have that in our thoughts as well.
We've talked a lot about sort of working together with housing and schools and all the rest of it. There were 2 big new housing developments in a city that I sort of looked into, and one of them was part built by the university in the city, and they put a school in there, and they put shops in there, and they insisted on that all of that happened because it's slightly out of town. And the other one, they just built the houses because the house builders weren't remotely interested in any other element of what else would be there and how people would get there and where they would park and where they would shop and so on. What efforts have gone into sort of talking to that industry, to the housing industry, the people who are going to be building these things, so that they have a sense of, we don't just want to build these things and disappear and get the most money we can? I mean, do you sense that industry is interested in infrastructure as well?
I've got to just jump in and start to say, however much there has been, it patently hasn't been enough. And I think I would hark back to something we were touching on earlier in the day, which is if you're a volume house builder, your business is in getting units built at a price that will secure you a return. You are not a social engineer. You are not looking at creating different sort of lifestyles. What you're trying to do is get bricks and mortar down and income in, and you'll only do that at a rate that your shareholders are going to benefit from. And I think that it's taken a while to sink into the housing policy world that wishing something was true isn't the same as making it true. And that if we're going to have a different approach, just as you've described, it's because somebody makes it happen. I'll come back to Martin's point. It's if somebody has a vision for a place and about how it's going to work, then that's going to take into account employment, education, health and other services, leisure and retail. And they'll think about them in the round, and they'll think, for example, at the point we start selling these houses to families, the school had better be built and open, not coming along in due course. If we want those people to get into the habit of getting the bus, the train to work, the bus or the train has to be there the day they move in. And better still, when they move into the house, it comes with a 1 month free pass. So they get the idea from day one. If they move in on day one with the 3 cars we were hearing about earlier, chances are they'll get into one of them and drive. Why wouldn't you?
And this is where, as I was saying, we need to reset the question, because I understand why we focus an awful lot on planning for the future, for planning for growth in terms of housing and jobs. But the overwhelming majority of movement on our transport system already exists. And we know from our own personal experiences, it's not sustainable. So our own experience now isn't good enough. Going back to the point you were making, Rupert, what is it we're looking for? So I think what you're seeing from the STBs is the opportunity to turn the telescope around. So rather than saying, here's where we start from, here's the growth that's coming, how do we manage and mitigate it, to start to say, where do we want to be in 20 or 30 years? And how do we use the opportunities created by growth to get us there? It won't be the only mechanism for getting us there, but it's one of the ways in which we can actually use it to change and support changes in travel to achieve those longer term objectives. And I think it's that turning the telescope around, not being so fixated on having the exact detail of that plan, because we know over 30 years there's going to be so many technological changes coming along, but making it relative to individuals, which is why, as I said earlier, we along with other STBs are looking at things like the data from Experian. It tells us about us, what we do in our daily lives. What is it that we're looking for? If we don't have an understanding of what we're trying to support and serve, we're going to carry on repeating the investment choices we've made to date, and yet we know as a profession they're not getting us into a place where we want to have that long-term sustainability.
I've to a good question from Ian here. Maria, it's coming your way. Okay. It just says, do you have the teeth you need to be given to enforce your priorities? So I guess we're going to start talking here a little bit about, Transport for the North and the difference it is having that act when you guys haven't got. So what can you do at the moment? What power do you have? People would like to know.
So I wouldn't use the word power at the moment. It's kind of toxic at the moment in the debate, and there's a lot of conversation about devolution. I think, particularly from a Midlands Connect perspective, we believe in the power of evidence and understanding and knowing the Midlands well. So there's a lot of conversations around actually STBs are equipped and empowered by local authorities and the business leaders of the region to bring the evidence together, which is what we're very proud of. We understand, we know where we're heading in terms of future growth. Martin's point about actually if you joined up all the visions across the Midlands, and we got very ambitious plans in the Combined Authority, in the East Midlands, around ports, around cities. We need to then bring it together and present a cohesive narrative that excites government. So it's not only about the asks and demanding government, it's about getting government to understand where the Midlands is heading next. And at the moment, there's not any other tool at a Midlands-wide level that allow us to do that. I mean, we're working a lot with wider government and Midlands Engine in itself, but subnational transport bodies are very well placed to give a much more strategic view and understanding of the direction of travel of a region, and not only, as it's been mentioned, in transport terms, but in wider infrastructure terms too. So we're putting a lot of effort in connections to 5G infrastructure, in energy infrastructure. We're tapping into water as well, and and therefore, what's the role of transport in all of that? So powers, we do admit, do help, and as you quite rightly say, we look to Transport for the North. But to be frank, is what difference does having a statutory status and what difference is already making? And at the moment, as we see, government is in an interesting point. New government, who knows? So, but it really is about equipping the subnational transport bodies to make decisions, to recommend and make decisions on what is required in the future. Transport for the North have got those powers. Whether then they are replicated and responded by government, that's another matter. So we're definitely working together in that space, is to make sure that any future government will take us seriously and will take our vision and our recommendations seriously moving forward.
Rupert, you wanted to speak?
And I think it's an interesting debate, and I do look with some envy at Peter, not least because that means his funding settlements are a little bit more certain than ours. If you look at Transport for the South East, there's 16 local transport authorities, 46 boroughs and districts, 5 local enterprise partnerships. The board is democratically elected local authority members. Who better knows their local communities? And what the board is saying is we want to come together to speak with a single voice to government on what we see the strategic infrastructure priorities for the South East. And they do that well. And I think the place the board are at the moment is they're saying, well, we've got our draft transport strategy. Shameless plug, we're consulting on it now. Closing date's 10th of January. Get your views in. But when we've finalised that transport strategy, that in effect becomes our business plan. That sets out where we want to be by 2050. And in order to do that, to get you in this room to a place that is really prosperous, really vibrant, good quality environment, good social infrastructure, we think there's going to be some powers, some things that we need to do to implement that. And I think that's our ask of government. There's going to be a range, a suite of things, call them powers, that we are going to need in order to deliver that business plan. And so that's where we are.
Peter, in practical terms, what difference does it make having that legal standing?
So it's been a really useful stepping stone. So I don't think it was ever going to be the final version of Transport for the North. So it's been really useful that we now have statutory advice that the Secretary of State has to listen to. I think what our board has discovered is that actually in the 18 months that we've been there is they actually want more. At a time when politicians are falling out, we got politicians from all colours to agree a strategic transport plan in 18 months. And so what they're after now is that actually we don't want to just give advice. What we want is we want a budget to make decisions on our priorities, to deliver them, to be held accountable, and to actually make sure that the customer is put at the heart of what we do. And I think, that's because business has still got to go on and people still have to take the kids to school and people still have to do appointments. Well, occasionally, big delivery bodies can be delivering something that affects that. So we know that we've got to develop our system. So, Transport for the North is looking at how we go on to the next stage, and we'll be sharing this knowledge so that, so everybody, all our colleagues know where we're going with this. But I think what we've shown here is that actually devolution really works, but devolution will work even better if they have the powers, the funding, the evidence base and the decision making so that we can pull together not only transport but planning, but with that will then move on to health and various other things. So you have the Metro Mayors currently consulting on bus franchising. You've got in Greater Manchester looking at social services and health. So I think actually at a local level people can make the right decisions for that geography. What we're saying is that we together can make the right decisions for the country.
Do you have a sense of responsibility that you do a really good job of it and it kind of proves the case and then potentially other people can follow you?
Yeah, I think we've done a really good job because I think they're trying to hold these folks back. So that's a bigger sign of success that I think we can have. But no, I think the fact that politicians aren't going to back a losing horse, and the fact that across the North, 20 leaders say we want more shows that actually it's been really, really successful. And we can, it's not about the North, it's about giving these guys the tools to make the right decisions for their area, because it will be different, because we are different areas. But ultimately, within a framework, we will deliver a cohesive, integrated transport system that meets the needs of the future. And there's a question here on active travel, and we need to provide the facilities for active travel because that meets our environmental needs and it meets our health needs. So we can start to give the vision and the plan so that you don't have chaos and you do, and do deliver things.
So can I add to that, because it's a very important point that we're making here. So for instance, given that we are in Highways UK and I got industry representatives from across in the floor. Some national transport bodies were requested by government to provide a regional evidence-based and an investment plan for the next 5 years on the major road network. We were also tasked to prioritize what local major projects we wanted also delivered across the Midlands. And we did that in an unprecedented collaborative way with every single local highway authority across the Midlands. So don't underestimate the efforts here in terms of agreeing not only what was ready to be delivered, and what was also those that we wanted to develop further. And that's, we know, very important for the industry. You also need certainty in terms of what is the investment, what is the capital program for delivery across the Midlands. So we were really pleased with the trust that government put in some national transport bodies to do that exercise. Now, we submitted our plans, almost 600 million worth of capital investment for the Midlands in July, I do apologize. That was the first tester to how serious government was going to be about some national transport bodies moving forward. There was a massive celebration when government decided to allocate 5-year allocations to Highways England in terms of capital investment and development through the RISC program. STBs were equally excited about the ability to empower local highway authorities and STBs to plan for investment in major road networks and other major local schemes of 50 million plus. Yet, government said, thank you very much, we really like the way you have worked together, the evidence you provided, how you prioritize, but we'll still make decisions as and when. So we're not quite there yet. And it's really important that everybody acknowledges where we are in the journey with some national transport bodies and what our intentions, our ambitions are. As Peter says, there is more ambition to be more influent. We have more empowered to make decisions and to receive that very much needed investment. So huge effort, prioritization, cross-party. This is not just one political side of our submission. Parties of all colours across the Midlands agree one programme for investment, yet we're still waiting that kind of 5-year commitment from government. So bear with us, statutory or not, there's still a lot of things to be done. And that's why we are working so closely together to ensure that any new government will back the regions in the way where we want this to happen. So we are moving into a completely new way of working with the government across the piece. So rebalancing the economy, this is what it means. It's about empowering regions to choose and make decisions on the destiny and the future investment programs. So I hope that helps in that sense.
Steve, I'm going to bring you in here because you spent many years in government. Why do you think there was a reluctance to give other bodies powers, particularly perhaps with some of the previous ministers? And do you think ultimately governments don't really like giving away powers? It's going to be a bit of a job to actually get them to give, for example, 7 different bodies their own independent powers. How realistic is it?
Well, I think I'd start by saying that you are light upon a truth, which is if you come into government, you come into a department as a minister, you'd rather be taking decisions about getting things done than decisions that change administrative boundaries or processes where, let's face it, someone else gets to cut the ribbon. So there is definitely a bit of that. That said, I think there are 3 things I learned from being responsible, amongst other things, for the major projects fund that we've touched on. One is transport disregards administrative boundaries. Our administrative boundaries were designed sort of to suit us, but the fact is roads and railways weave their way across them, and they just do. And we can waste an awful lot of time trying to devise perfect structures, new local government structures. My opinion is they aren't there. They're not going to be there. We're going to need a slightly messy set, some of which are focused on the very local, but some of which can take a regional view. Second, and the reason for needing that regional view is to provide reasonably long-term funding certainty at the borough or even the county level for capital projects is very hard. They're very lumpy. They come along once in a while. We're not going to build another Halton Bridge, which was out of scale with anything that local authority had done in decades, and will be again. But it's possible at the regional level to start coming up with a budget that is a 5-year look. So I think that is a good thing. The third thing is we do tend to look too much at enhancement to existing networks and skip rather lightly past the fact, as Martin has said, not only is most of the travel that people do there already, we're already doing it, but most of the infrastructure is there today. And we're not going to add, in percentage terms, that much to it anytime soon. We do need to have an eye to making sure it's in good shape.
And I think just building on that again, Steve, you touched on earlier about how we need to join some of these things up. What I think you're seeing, certainly within England's economic heartland, the debate about is actually, it's not just about being a subnational transport body, it's actually about being a subnational infrastructure body. And the Institution of Civil Engineers published their State of the Nation report earlier this year and made that kind of observation. And the reason why that's important is because we know that some of the changes that are happening, some of the changes we, as users of a transport system, are looking for are driven by digital connectivity. They're driven by, as Maria says, about availability of electricity and power supplies. There are mechanisms for joining up these investment programs, most of which actually operate around a 5-year investment program. So it's not as if we're trying to create a whole new swathe of doing things. It's just about doing things better and using the mechanisms that exist to do that, which is where I think, Richard, we sometimes underestimate the power of collaboration. You're absolutely right, Steve. I think as a nation and as a profession, we get paranoid about governance. I think I'm on my third incarnation of regional working alone. The reality is, it's us, people, you, me, everybody around this discussion who are the people that make this happen. The collaboration between us makes it happen. What you're seeing in the subnational transport bodies is political and business leadership. Those people stepping up, choosing to come together to paint that vision and an ambition, and then taking that back in to deliver at the local level within that longer term framework. That's a very powerful message to send to government. It's equally a powerful message to send to the institutional investors, many of whom are going to be the real drivers of investment through the utilities and major infrastructure. Collaboration is really a powerful driver here.
I mean, it's interesting you say that, because a lot of people will be thinking, well, you're all also competing, you know, potentially for a limited amount of money or limited resources to get things into your region rather than another region. How do you get that balance right between swapping ideas and working together, but also making sure you don't lose out as a region? Because, you know, that's important too.
Well, I think there's, of course, there's a nice friendly rivalry. But, you know, the reality of it is, you know, we are in this together. And, you know, Transport for the South Sea's success is TfN's success, is Midlands Connect. And you just have to look at how the movement of goods and services works across this country. That, you know, whatever happens with Nissan in Sunderland, they'll be shipping vehicles out of Southampton, going through all of our respective areas. So, you know, it is that, you know, individual and collective approach to working that I think, you know, we've established that works well across not just the 4 that you see here, but across the 7. And it's less about arguing for specific elements of cash for, you know, my projects. It's about what's best to, you know, facilitate that economic growth in a sustainable way. So, you know, as I say, of course, there's friendly rivalry, and you know, it's no fun otherwise, is it? But, you know, it is about a single aim.
Are there points where you're all going in and, say, meeting a government minister together and one voice saying, we want this, we want this?
Yes, we definitely do. And I think that I completely endorse Rupert. And of course there will be competition, but we understand that the competition is on how government makes sure that investment happens across the piece, rather than in a specific area or just focusing on cities, or, you know, because also we are almost the voice of rural areas. Rural areas seem to be forgotten in this debate about infrastructure investment. So, so there has to be that healthy competition. And don't forget, a lot of the investment that we require is going to take at least 5-6 years in the making. So the competition becomes almost like an ongoing journey rather than a bitter journey, if that sense. And you're absolutely right. What happens in the Midlands, we always feel will benefit everybody, because no matter where you go in the country, you know, they're all laughing, because that's my slogan. No matter where you are in the country, you will either have to cross the Midlands, you cannot avoid it. So whatever happens in the Midlands will benefit everybody in the same way in the south or in the north.
And just, again, almost taking us right back to the very start where we're talking about climate change, and if I reflect upon the responses we've had to our outlined transport strategy, the climate change emergency has come through very loud, very clear from right across the responses, and at some level that's not unsurprising. You know, I would suggest that each of us are a bit worried about this in terms of what it means for our own individual circumstances. But actually, you've hit on a point there, Maria, that there are some difficult choices coming. This point that Steve made about it's not easy, it's complex. We're making choices now which will be delivered in 5 or 10 years' time. If we're not careful, we're going to have a conversation about the need to do things differently, the fact that business as usual is no longer acceptable, and yet we are already in danger of locking in decisions that are going to set the same trajectory for the next 5, 10 years and beyond. So when we're talking about working together, the climate change, the response to the environmental challenge is an area where as STBs working collectively, we can say, look, these are the scope of the challenges. It's not easy. We have that evidence base. We can think and understand what the nature of the demand moving forward is. And we can work with you, government, to actually think about taking those difficult choices sooner so that we actually address the outcomes we're looking for achieving.
Okay, I just want to finish. I don't know if you've watched the news, but there's an election going on at the moment.
Yes.
And, you know, I'll start with you, Steve. What difference could a new government make? Suppose we get a Labour government, actually. They haven't said a lot on, we've been discussing this, they haven't said a lot on roads budgets yet. We don't quite know what they would do, for example. We don't know what the Lib Dems would do. What difference could this election make?
I think I would say well, one of the many things that are intriguing about this election is that the different approaches might come on different issues, but not so much on traditional party political lines. I suspect that all of the parties will be seeking to outdo each other on environmental commitments. Yeah. I think that the likelihood of a different, perhaps stronger relationship, statute being provided to give other STBs a statutory basis might have more to do with who the next Transport Secretary is and who the next Secretary of State for Housing is, and whether they agree with each other rather than whether they're in the Labour Party or the Conservative Party. I think, for the moment at least, I think the direction of travel is set. I think that the sense that it makes sense to be taking a regional view, and it makes a lot of sense to let regions prioritise transport projects rather than somebody like me sitting in a government building in Whitehall doing it. I think that direction is set. I hope so, at least.
How do you? I know you're going to have to work with whoever comes in. So I mean, you know, but are you sort of confident that the role of these sort of bodies is going to continue, whoever gets in?
So I think, you know, if I had a 30-second pitch in a lift with either the Prime Minister, is I would say, if you work with the subnational transport bodies, I will make you look good. And that's all a politician wants. We can make your life easier. We can provide the right transport and connectivity to improve people's lives in the north. Why wouldn't they want to work with us?
I mean, I have exactly the same pitch. I mean, slightly different to Peter. I wouldn't nick his wallet. But, you know, I think if you want to deliver a sustainable future for transport and all the things that can support in terms of economic growth, you know, protecting and enhancing the environment, putting in place the right social infrastructure, put your money with the STBs. So, you know, it matters not what they're all, you know, I couldn't guess where it's all going to go. But whatever the outcome is, we stand ready to do that.
Yeah.
And I think that's the point. These bodies have come together not because necessarily somebody said within Whitehall that they were a good thing. They've come together because the political and the business leaders could see the added value of collaborative strategic partnerships that have transformed then into a statutory body in Transport for the North, and across the three here, you've got that ambition to be statutory bodies in their own rights. But that comes from a collaborative partnership driven by the recognition of political and business leaders at a regional level that it makes sense. And if that makes sense to them, that's not going to be changed by whatever happens at a national level. And I think is exactly the point that others have made. There's an opportunity here to make life easy and to deliver things on the ground.
Well, thank you all for such a stimulating session. I mean, next year we might have all 7 of you, or it might even be more than 7, mightn't there? And thanks again, Steve, for this morning and for staying on to do this as well. We're back in an hour. We're going to be talking about autonomous vehicles and future mobility. But for now, please thank the panel.